welcome back to a continuation of Discourse 1, the ego personality, the one who miscreates. This is session number 4. The ego trance. The term spiritual awakening is a term often used in spiritual texts to describe the process of enlightenment and transcendence, along with previously stated assertions that the ego body-mind consciousness creates by perception and projection an illusory, dreamlike personal reality, Maya, that is not real. Then the ego can be likened to a sleeping entity. A Course in Miracles confirms this. Yet the Bible says that a deep sleep fell upon Adam, and nowhere is there reference to his waking up. The world has not yet experienced any comprehensive reawakening or rebirth. Such a rebirth is impossible as long as you continue to project or miscreate. Previously in this discourse, the ego archetype was described as a pattern of filters and biases that determine fixations of focus and attention. Its effect is to take your unlimited awareness and limit it to a very narrow bandwidth of attention, hence enabling a very particular point of view to be experienced. The ego takes on a telescopic, limited perspective of life that is then viewed through a narrow lens known as my life. Wholeness is then perceived as divided and separate. This condition of concentrating and narrowing the focus of attention is identical to induction techniques practiced in hypnotism. The word hypnotism derives from the Greek word hypnos, meaning to sleep. Hypnotism induces a trance-like states of being which renders the subject highly susceptible to suggestion. A further revelation as to the original etymology definition of the word trance means state of extreme dread or suspense, arising from trachea, be numb with fear. These definitions perfectly describe the ego, which can be considered an entranced or sleeping entity filled with fear. It has been stated previously in this discourse, the ego level of consciousness acts like a computer virus which distorts the source code of primal reality and instead inserts perceptions of false data that appear real and become fearful. The binary code used by the ego to construct its reality is programmable. The narrowed focus of attention experienced in a trance state keeps the ego fixated on the mental impressions streaming into its consciousness that are consistent with its self-identity. This constant internal dialogue acts as a hypnotist, filling the mind with self-suggestion and urges to maintain consistency with its own created version of who am I? Without this fixated point of attention that the ego consciousness maintains, there would be no personal or subjective point of view to be experienced, and hence no experience of a personal reality. Only primal reality would be known as this is your true being. This trance state is continually reinforced by the social consciousness, which is the ego collective, which acts as a consensus trance that keeps everyone in agreement as to what is real. There are psychological heuristics and cognitive biases that are common to all egos, regardless of the culture that they have been raised in. This ensures that the ego's perceptions remain consistent and repeatable within the construct of the dream. In his book, Transforming the Mind, Peter Shepard, a trainer in rational emotive psychotherapy, writes, "The illusion of unity of self is created firstly by the sensation of one physical body, secondly by one name, and thirdly by a number of mechanical habits which are implanted into him by education or acquired by imitation. Having always the same name and noticing in himself the same physical sensations, hearing always the same name and noticing in himself the same habits and inclinations he had before, He believes himself to be the same. The automated state may be described as consensus trance, where the hypnotist is personified as the culture. The ego-body-mind consciousness is inherently programmed as an urge to repeat, with ritual and repetitive thought impulses. It becomes mechanical, habitual, and automated in its behavior, but does not think consciously, but is driven by unconscious impulses and programs seeded within the operating system of the subconscious. The illusion of an independent, autonomous self is only a habitual way of thinking that is addicted to the states of being that are being generated by this repetition of internal dialogue. In this mode of consciousness, the ego is subjugated to conditioned behaviors that continuously cause the ego to react unconsciously, rather than an ability to respond with conscious awareness. Returning to the text of the Gnosis of Kali Yuga, understanding of this concept is further enhanced. Our individuality is diffused into a million different quarreling, contradictory I centers, each with its own desires and a pseudo-self-identity. In reality, none of the I centers has a real self-identity, but each I takes our true essence, our true existence, and traps a part of it. Each I is just a little piece of mental matter that is sleeping to its own desire. The I puts the consciousness it traps into a trance, and it leaves the consciousness without the ability to perceive the world in an objective fashion. In Western scientific thought, this concept of the ego acting as an autonomous entity was perfectly described by Nobel laureate Sir Charles Sherrington, a neurophysiologist who researched the nature of the neuron. He writes in his book, Man and His Nature, "Each waking day is a stage dominated for good or ill, in comedy, farce or tragedy, by a dramatis persona, the self, and so it would be until the curtain drops. This self is a unity, the continuity of its presence in time, sometimes hardly broken by sleep, its inalienable interiority in central space, its consistency of viewpoint, the privacy of its experience, combined to give it status as a unique existence. It regards itself as one, others treat it as one. It is addressed as one by a name to which it answers. The law and the state schedule it as one. It and they identify it with a body which is considered by it and them to belong to it integrally. In short, unchallenged and unargued, conviction assumes it to be one. The logic of grammar endorses this by a pronoun in the singular. All its diversity is merged into oneness." Always remember that the purpose of the ego-body-mind consciousness is to conceal or veil the truth of your real identity, being that of spiritual essence or soul, the omniscient, all-knowing consciousness. The kingdom of heaven has been hidden from you deliberately. In order to know, one must first not know. The hypnotic trance state of the ego is used to accomplish this purpose. The word know derives from root word know, which lies behind the original word of gnosis. Gnosis was used by the Greeks to mean knowledge, especially special knowledge of spiritual mysteries. Now a further definition can be added with the understanding of the word hypo, meaning under, beneath, up from under. Hypnosis is hypognosis, under the state of gnosis, without knowledge. The Gnosis of Kali Yuga explains further. Ego is a particular type of crystallization or condensation of energy. Just as water vapor condenses out of air into water upon a plane of glass, so can the vibrations of life condense improperly, somewhat like a parasite upon the surface of the mind. These vibrations condense improperly when we make use of the creative energy incorrectly. This leaves the mind infused, infested with a malignity we refer to as the ego. Ego bottles consciousness up within it and leaves the consciousness hypnotized. In Western culture, the concept of hypnotism is more commonly associated with entertainment. Yet a closer examination of how it is possible to achieve such outcomes as it does would reveal the truth of the assertions being made here. The ego is a program, and hence it can be hacked or accessed through the subconscious. Just as a hypnotist can reawaken a person from their hypnotic trance state, so too is the aim of practices associated with spiritual awakening, called at-one-ment, salvation, yoga, and enlightenment. A Course in Miracles in chapter 6 of the text describes this requirement of the ego to awaken from its trance state. God's extending outward, though not his completeness, is blocked when the sonship does not communicate with him as one. So he thought, "My children sleep and must be awakened." How can you wake children in a more kindly way than by a gentle voice that will not frighten them, but will merely remind them that the night is over and the light has come? You do not inform them that the nightmares that frighten them so badly are not real, because children believe in magic. You merely assure them that they are safe now. Then you train them to recognize the difference between sleeping and waking, so they will understand they need not be afraid of dreams. And so when the bad dreams come, they will themselves call on the light to dispel them. The ego program. Contained within the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, God Talks with Arjuna, written by Indian guru Paramahansa Yogananda, a concise description of the intention and purpose of the ego body-mind consciousness program is stated. The purpose of Bhishma, the ego or pseudo-soul, is to keep the consciousness continually busy with sensory reports and activities by focusing the searchlight of attention outwardly on the body and the world of matter, instead of inwardly on God and the true soul nature. At the core of the ego program, which impels the experience of a dream or false reality into expression, the original thought that states, "I am separate." This is the governing first belief that all other beliefs arise from and forms the foundation of the illusion, because it is not truth and hence the first lie. Beliefs are an essential code for the ego program to operate, as they are the opposite of truth. To know is not a belief. Once again, we examine the original definitions and meanings of words through etymology. An enhancement of understanding is strengthened. The word belief means conviction of the truth of a proposition or alleged fact without knowledge. The belief "I am separate" is the opposite to truth, "I am one." Now the statement made in the text in the Course in Miracles mentioned earlier, stating, "Into eternity where all is one there crept a tiny mad idea at which the Son of God remembered not to laugh," becomes much clearer. The idea was, "I am separate." This was the first error or sin that was loaded into the program and became the garbage in analogy. From that moment on, you could do nothing other than miscreate or experience the garbage out. A Course in Miracles discusses the impact of this first error. You may be surprised to hear how very different is reality from what you see. You do not realize the magnitude of that one error. It was so vast and so completely incredible that from it a world of total unreality had to emerge. What else could come of it? Its fragmented aspects are fearful enough as you begin to look at them, but nothing you have seen begins to show you the enormity of the original error, which seemed to cast you out of heaven, to shatter knowledge into meaningless bits of disunited perceptions, and to force you to make further substitutions. As previously mentioned in reference to the story of the Garden of Eden, the ego arises as the symbol of this idea of separation. With a split or divided mind, the ego was now capable of suppressing unwanted feelings and emotions out of conscious awareness. This suppression or hiding aspects of the self is now projected and seems to appear outside of itself. Projection has now created perception, or something to be observed. Again, A Course in Miracles continues in the same chapter to expand on this understanding. That was the first projection of error outward. The world arose to hide it and become the screen on which it was projected and drawn between you and truth. For truth extends inward, where the idea of loss is meaningless and only increase is conceivable. Do you really think it strange that a world in which everything is backwards and upside down arose from this projection of error? It was inevitable. For truth brought to this could only remain within quiet and take no part in all the mad projection by which this world was made. Call it not sin, but madness, for such it was, and so it still remains. Invest it not with guilt, for guilt implies it was accomplished in reality. And above all, be not afraid of it. As the ego is a symbol of separation, then the body is a symbol of the ego, as it is used to confirm its independent reality. It is with this creation of a body that the illusory concepts of self-identification arise. The senses all attest to a reality that exists external to yourself. You identify and label what is now perceived to be me and mine with another that is labeled as you and other. What is unified in primal reality is now experienced as a personalized subjective reality. The individual I, through an inner sensations of feelings, emotions, memories, and thoughts, creates what appears to be an inner world and an outer externalized world. The ego identifies itself with these sensory sensations and uses language to apply definitions and labels of self-reference to its experience. I am here, I have a cat, I wear a hat, I use my car, I am sad, I looked at the moon. Language is the chief instrument that segments and fragments the unified primal reality of oneness and creates distinctions and populates its subjective experience with fictitious entities, things, and objects. Despite your use of language to define, conceptualize, and label reality, life remains oblivious and unified regardless. Differentiation does not make separation a fact, only an experience. For as you divide reality, so will you act. Now that the ego has perceived for itself a body as a symbol of its thought, I am separate, then the concept arises that I can die. With this thought and awareness as to your own apparent mortality, an urge arises to act and behave in such a way that will ensure your continuing existence. This is the battle for survival that the ego continually wages in its environment against an illusory other. What is naturally abundant and plentiful in primary reality, as symbolized by the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, becomes scarce and lacking as it appears to be outside of yourself. The concepts of scarcity and lack are not innate in life itself. They are only intrinsic to the ego body-mind consciousness, which resides in the illusory dream of separation. The repression of guilt and shame, as symbolized by the eating of the forbidden fruit by Adam and Eve, allowed for the experience of projection that seemingly created an external world, which now has to be conquered in order to survive. When identified with the ego sensory-based reality that divides life as duality, then you will experience lack. a black hole opens up that feels something is missing. The ego then becomes the eternal seeker, continually searching outside of itself for completion and fulfillment to fill the black hole that compels the feelings of emptiness. As long as you are attuned to the thought stream of the ego, body, mind, consciousness, these thoughts of lack and scarcity will be your constant companion, and fear will arise. The possibility that you may not get what you think you need will constantly feed states of being that are filled with anxiety, stress, worry, and depression. A feeling of being deprived is felt, and anger at the continual frustration of being thwarted in your endeavours to secure life's elusive chest of treasures. This will be the underlying theme of your dream. A Course in Miracles reflects on this state of needing. Your Father knoweth that you have need of nothing. In heaven this is so, for what could you need in eternity? In your world you do need things, because it is a world of scarcity in which you find yourself, because you are lacking. When the first thought of I am separate arose in ego, body, mind, consciousness, and the certainty of death became real, then the concept or experience of need also arose with it. There was something that you needed in order to survive. Prior to this concept, there were no needs. Your primal reality and truth as spiritual essence ensures your eternal existence as an immortal and infinite being of awareness. Your existence is guaranteed. As Neale Donald Walsch once said, need is fear announced. In his book, Communion with God, he details the 10 illusions that exist within the ego's construct of reality. Of those 10, it is the illusion of need that forms the foundation for all of the others that follow. He writes, the first illusion is need exists. This is not only the first illusion, but the grandest. On this illusion, all other illusions based. Everything that you currently experience in life, everything that you feel moment to moment, is rooted in this idea and your thoughts about it. Need is non-existent in the universe. One needs something only if one requires a particular result. The universe does not require a particular result. The universe is the result. Need is likewise non-existent in the mind of God. With your expanded understanding that the ego, body, mind consciousness is an inverted or opposite state of mind to that of Christ consciousness, then need must arise, as it compels the experience of getting. It is a contraction of the infinite energy of the universe as accorded by the binary code that limits the flow of energy. Infinite intelligence is whole and complete unto itself, at peace and in equilibrium. This is the conscious of union and expressed as giving, as it is the full expression of unlimited energy that is expansive and sharing. This energy is also referred to as love. The ego can then be more clearly understood when considered as lacking in love. The ego does not know universal love, which is beyond need and unconditional. Instead, it becomes an experience of love that is conditional. It has to seek love outside of itself to feel complete. Lack of the infinite intelligence energy of love is called fear, as it is the opposite or inversion of your natural pure being that is love. The text of A Course in Miracles also writes within this definition of fear as being a blockage or a barrier to the truth that is love. Fear is the result of the original sin or error, as defined earlier in this discourse. Darkness is lack of light, as sin is lack of love. It has no unique properties of its own. It is an example of the scarcity belief from which only error can proceed. Truth is always abundant. Those who perceive and acknowledge that they have everything have no needs of any kind. The purpose of the at-one-ment is to restore everything to you, or rather, to restore it to your awareness. You were given everything when you were created, just as everyone was. The arising of needs within the ego, body, mind, consciousness thought stream most clearly demonstrated within personal relationships that the ego cultivates as part of its survival program. It joins with others who are perceived to assist and benefit the inner drive to survive. Special relationships are formed where another is identified as being the most profitable and able to meet your needs. When the other fails or is deficient in meeting those needs, suffering results. This suffering associated and accompanying special relationships is a significant symptom of the ego's miscreations, and hence will be given greater attention in the Discourse number 5, Special Relationships. Because the ego is deeply invested in its foundational belief that it has a body, as this reinforces the belief in separation, the majority on needs are based around satisfying the sensations of the body. With need comes getting, and all of the strategies and mechanisms that the ego constructs to not only attract to itself, but also elevate the individuated I within the hierarchy of the social herd. Its urge is not just to survive, but to prosper. This self-focused mentality of the ego's survivalist program is behind the selfish, narcissistic, self-interested focus of attention that abides by the rule, I will give only if I get something in return. A Course in Miracles reflects on this abiding rule of the ego. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. Appetites are getting mechanisms representing the ego's need to confirm itself. This is as true of the body appetites as it is of the so-called higher ego needs. Body appetites are not physical in origin. The ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body. But the idea that this is possible is a decision of the mind, which has become completely confused about what is really possible. In the study of psychological biases inherent in the ego program, this rule of giving to get is more commonly known as reciprocation, and it is one of the most powerful influences operating within the ego, body, mind, consciousness thought system. Psychologist and author Robert B. Cialdini, PhD, in his book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, includes reciprocation as one of the 6 major influences dominant in human psychology. The impressive aspect of the rule for reciprocation and the sense of obligation that goes with it is its pervasiveness in human culture. It is so widespread that after intensive study, sociologists such as Alvin Gouldner can report that there is no human society that does not subscribe to its rule. And within each society, it seems pervasive also. It permeates exchanges of every kind. Genuine altruism and charity are therefore not traits of the ego who is operating from a fear-based consciousness and is therefore not capable of expressing such a mindset or attitude. Abundance is only an attribute of Christ consciousness. A Course in Miracles again confirms this. Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is obvious when you consider what is involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will have to do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better and can therefore do without the thing you give. In many respects, the ego is highly predatory, as it seeks what it needs from the other that appears to be external to it and separate from itself. It is highly suspicious and distrustful of another person's motives and intentions, as it is also itself capable of lies and deceptions to further its own self-interest. When thwarted in its intentions to procure resources and assets from its environment, anger, hostility, hatred, and resentment can be projected onto the other person who is deemed to be a hindrance to its aspirations and goals of fulfillment. The ego judges and delegates every person that it meets as either an ally that can contribute to its own self-interests or an enemy that hinders or frustrates its efforts to procure what it believes it needs. Thus, the ego's projection of its own mental biases and beliefs creates a reality which is experienced as a constant battlefield of conflict and propensity for attack. Friend or foe are the ego's guiding rule. This ends session number 4 in the first discourse, The Ego Personality to One Who Miscreates. I shall put a link for session number 5 in the description box below. Thank you so much for your attendance for this session, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session. So be it.